Hello and welcome back to the Widow podcast. I am joined today by the lovely Emma Gray. Emma is a widow, a former end-of-life solicitor, trainee counsellor, mum to two girls, person behind Rainbow Hunting, and a wannabe author. So Emma, hello. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for asking me on. That's quite a mouthful for you to take.
I had to write it down. I was like, I'm never going to remember all of that. And I'm sure we'll touch on all of it as well as we talk. But before we kind of do get into all of that, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your husband, Simon, and what happened to him and how and when he died?
Yeah, sure. So my husband was an officer in the Royal Marines. We'd met when he was in training. So we've been together for really quite a long time. We had two girls together. And then sadly in 2013, despite the fact that he'd been to Afghanistan and had various jobs around the world and all the rest of it, he ended up being diagnosed with cancer at home in December 2013. We knew that things were bad. And it took quite a long time to actually get him diagnosed, which was frustrating. But actually, we did some investigations and I don't think the result would have been any different because it was quite advanced by the time he got diagnosed. So he and I knew that it was terminal from day one. But he figured that his body was his job. And I guess in hindsight, he was in quite a lot of denial to begin with, you know, like I'll beat this, I'll smash it, I'll get back to being a Royal Marine, it'll all be great. And he'd never known what else he wanted to be other than a Royal Marine as well. His job gave him a huge thing to live for and thing to keep going for really towards the end of his life. So they then diagnosed him in December 2013 as having esophageal cancer, but he also had seedlings of cancer all over the lining of his stomach, so they would never have got it all out. A patch by his heart, and in the lymph nodes next to his primary tumour as well. So they gave us the option that he could have chemotherapy, but the aim of the chemotherapy was to stop it. And so the aim was never to even shrink it back. And he faced it, as he did with everything in his life, with optimism and strength. And by the end of it all, they were stunned because it had actually shrunk his esophagus back to kind of almost a normal, he never quite ate properly again, but almost a normal sized esophagus again. So they then gave him consolidation radiotherapy. And we then had a bit of a bucket list where we could do some time with the kids and do some fun things. And then in the summer of 2016, he sadly died. But before he died, we knew it was getting worse. And so they challenged him with the same chemotherapy he had before. He had more radiotherapy, this time interior radiotherapy, because they figured everything had already been sapped a lot. And they tried him on some antibody drugs. He literally did everything he possibly could. And every day was a bonus. Every day was an extra day he had with the children and stuff like that. So when he died in July 2016, the girls were 6 and 8 years old.
Wow. And did he die at home?
So that was a really interesting one, actually. He initially said that, yes, he 100% wanted to die at home. But we had the most amazing hospice nurse from a local charity called Hospice Care down in the southwest. And I see her occasionally instead of having my own therapy because it was just easier logistically. And I went to chat to her one day towards the end and I was like, right, so he's going to die at home. And I've decided that one of my worst fears is that he's going to die while I'm asleep. So if that happens, I'm going to say this to the kids, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do the other. And she just stopped me and she just went, Emma, if the kids can't wake you up one Sunday morning, what are they going to remember about their dad? And I was like, oh God, I'd never thought about that. And I said to Simon, I don't really want you dying at home, but it's your choice. And it's really bizarre because I found that for us, life was revolving around him and his wishes. And suddenly I was like, you know what? There's a whole family of us. But I didn't want to, he had to be the one to make decision.
Yeah.
So I said, you know, this is the story I've had with the hospice nurse. This is what she said. And typical bloke, it took him at least a week or so. And he was like, oh, I've had an idea. I think I'd rather stay in the hospice. Great plan.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, he had a lovely garden room in the
Oh,
hospice, and that's where he died.
wow. So it sounds like you had some quite sort of honest and open conversations about his end of life and what he wanted and what you wanted that to look like, and how you would, I guess, support each other through it.
Yeah.
How do you go about having those conversations with somebody? For you guys, was it a natural thing, or was it something you had to work towards having?
It's really interesting, because if you'd asked me while he was still alive,
yeah,
I would have had a different answer. I would have said, well, I'm an end-of-life solicitor, I have to do this all the time, it's really really important, everyone's got to have these conversations, we've just got to man up and have them. And my husband's in the military, so therefore we'd always had our will up to date. You know, we changed it when we had the kids and all the rest of it. So you know, we kind of lived with an expectation that something horrendous might actually die at any point in time. But if you ask me now, I think there's still more conversations we didn't have, and still things that I wasn't strong enough to ask him about, and I wish I had been.
So were you conscious at the time that you wanted to have those conversations, but you pushed them to one side?
I wasn't consciously aware of it, because I might have been a bit stronger, but subconsciously I knew that there was a niggle. I mean, like, the perfect example is I wanted to talk to him more about the children and what his hopes and dreams were for the kids and stuff like that, and we talked about it a little bit. But he did struggle with the concept of us moving on without him, and so to protect him, I didn't have those conversations because I didn't want to upset him, and I wish now that I had. But he did a huge amount to ensure that people didn't forget him. I mean, the preparation he put into his end of life was amazing.
Oh, really? So was that guided by you because of your experience? Yeah.
I'm quite bossy, can you tell?
See, it's interesting, isn't it, when you've got that insight and knowledge, but so many people haven't. And you know, and I speak to a lot of people that have obviously nursed their husbands through these terminal illnesses, and you know, then they die, and then you're trying to recreate something, you know, for you afterwards, but things do come up, don't they? And there's these are all these unanswered questions and all these conversations, and there's a lot of guilt and heaviness around these things of not having them. But it's difficult because sometimes the person dying doesn't want to have the conversations, do they? You know, a lot of times I speak to people and they say they just didn't want to accept that they were going to die, and to face that. And what do you do in those situations? You know, it's hard, isn't it? Because you can't force someone, I suppose, to talk about something that they don't want to talk about. But in terms of what Simon did and how he helped you and the conversations you had, what do you think were the most helpful for you in terms of helping you in your grief after Simon died?
I have not sure about what was the most helpful. The help I did get, I got some help from the Royal Marines.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes, they were good.
They helped with the funeral. So it was almost like I was the CEO and they were the people making it happen. And that was just amazing, to be the one who felt in control of the funeral and felt in control of it all, but actually to have the nitty-gritty done by someone else. That was really, really, really helpful. And then I found a lot of the little things helpful. So the friends who were really practical, not just I'll make you a meal, but by the way, what food do your kids eat?
Yes.
Because the number of people who made me meals, but the kids actually didn't like it.
Yeah.
Then I felt guilty throwing it away. And it was really awkward. And they did that a lot when Simon was alive as well, because of course he had trouble eating, and then it was like, oh, I'll make you guys a meal. But the most helpful was someone who made cookies. My gosh, I think I ate most of them, but Simon loved them too. Cookies and cake, that was great. But also some of the really practical things like mowing the lawn, cleaning the gutters, the kind of jobs that Simon used to do, that I immediately after he died, I got so cross when I was having to do the boy jobs. And for me, there weren't many boy jobs because he was in the forces and I was pretty much a single parent a lot of the time anyway. So I was pretty good, but I got quite frustrated with some of those. And then I have to say, I mean, I know that you're a coach and I'm trained to be a counsellor, but I have to say, sometimes you just need external help. And I have had a lot of counselling, and that has been a huge help.
I think it is. I think it's really important that we find something that helps support us, that we can find someone that we connect with, that we can, you know, share our truth with, because as lovely as family and friends are, I think there's that element of sometimes we don't feel comfortable sharing everything that goes on in our heads with them because people don't understand. Also, we all have that sort of desire to fix someone, don't we, to make it better, to find that silver lining. And I get it, you know, like I'm as guilty of it as the next person. But when you find someone that you can just speak to from the heart without worrying that they're going to say something that might trigger something within you or makes you withdraw because you just go, oh, do you know what, I can't be bothered, they don't get it, they're just trying to make me feel better, and just make sense of your thoughts. Because like you, I had counselling after my husband died, because there's stuff that goes on, isn't there, in your head that makes you feel deeply uncomfortable, and the thoughts and the feelings that you have, even towards your friends and family, you know, these people that are really, really being kind, of, you know, and you have all these mixed feelings, and you're like, oh God, I'm a really bad person. I can't be feeling like this. And just to go somewhere and share all that with someone that's neutral, it's priceless, isn't it, really, in 100%. Our journeys.
I also found that I was quite an empath, and I hadn't realized how much of an empath I was. So if I was talking to friends or family, I was so aware of what I was saying was landing with them and how upset they were getting. I felt like I was almost counselling my friends and family when I was telling them what was going on, and people felt guilty when they wanted to open up their issues, because in comparison they thought that they were small, and I used to say, no, that's huge for you.
Definitely. You're treated differently, aren't you? And I also found it hard, I don't know about you, but I found it hard because it almost felt like nobody really grieved in front of me, like that they kind of, there was this kind of respect almost of my grief, and that it was the biggest grief, and in the end I almost felt quite lonely in my grief, because I was like, am I the only person grieving my husband? Is anyone else kind of, apart from his mum? But I remember one day my sister kind of just broke down and cried, and she was like, I'm so sorry, I just miss him so much and it really hurts. And I was like, oh my God, it's such a relief. You know, like, share this with me, because I was starting to feel like nobody else was feeling this loss. And I was the only one in that. So you're right, you know, sometimes having people just share what's going on for them and their normality and their feelings.
It's really interesting, actually, because two things came to mind for me when you were saying that. One of them is that when people used to cry in front of me, I felt like I had to give them permission. I'm like, please do cry, because actually it shows me how much he meant to you, and I love that. So please do cry, because I don't mind you crying, and actually I think tears are really brave. So because that's showing me your emotions, and I think that's really brave.
Definitely.
And the other thing that came to mind to me, which was really interesting, but because he was in the military, I had this like hierarchy of death thing in my head, and I think families often have it within a family, like what feels the worst, the mother, the child, the sibling, the spouse, like what feels the worst. But in the military, there's this whole thing of on the battlefield, off the battlefield, cancer, illness, suicide, you know, and because they were serving for their country and they were blown up by an IED, does that make it worse than a car accident at home? And it wasn't until the lockdown, and lockdown was huge for me in so many ways, but it wasn't until lockdown I reconnected with a part of the Royal Marines charity called the RMA, Royal Marines Association. And a guy there said to me, he was like, there is no hierarchy in death. No. And I was like, that's it. There is just no hierarchy. A death is death, and it's all rubbish.
Yeah, you're right. It's so true, isn't it? And we do seem to want to sort of come up with this hierarchy of death and loss and who's worse off, and it's kind of like, it's understanding that your loss is the worst loss because it's yours, you know, and their worst loss is their loss because it's theirs. And trying to kind of place everything in this hierarchy, you're either sort of minimizing somebody else's loss by placing yours higher, or you're diminishing or minimizing your loss because you think yours is less than somebody else's. And it's, what does that even achieve? You still, you know, so you're right. It's but I think it's something we naturally do, isn't it, in our losses. So you've talked about kind of the things that helped you. Was there anything that you did after Simon died that on reflection maybe didn't help you, or you know, that our coping mechanisms?
Oh yeah, a classic, until lockdown. So my default coping strategy throughout my whole life has been to keep busy, which is absolutely fine in the short term, but in the long term it's just not sustainable. And lockdown was an enforced full stop for me, and it was lovely.
Yes. Yeah.
It was just what I needed. I mean, it wasn't lovely. It totally had its moments. I worried about my parents and all the rest of it, but there were aspects of it that were bliss. Yes.
Do you know what? It's funny, isn't it? I mean, for me, I found the first one was horrendous. It's almost like I went backwards in my grief. I felt very alone and isolated. And as for homeschooling, that just tipped me over the edge. But I almost kind of adapted to it, and over time started to appreciate it for being able to slow down a little bit, you know, and not have the expectation that is placed on you from all these external sources all the time. And maybe didn't really fully make the most of it in that first lockdown, but certainly in the second and third, that you know, it was like, actually, this is okay. And then coming out of it and having to readjust, there's almost now a sense of, oh, can we just do that for a couple of weeks? Just to take all those pressures and those expectations away, because it does, you know, and it forces you to stop and take notice, doesn't it? Which isn't a bad thing. So when you sort of say you know, your default mechanism is to keep busy, what did you do? Throw yourself into work, socializing?
Yeah, so initially I threw myself into doing his probate. So I thought that being a private client solicitor, I would like go straight back to work. Like I just thought that would be, you know, I knew that I like to keep busy and I thought that's what I'd do. But actually I realized that I quite enjoyed being with the kids and having a bit of time off and all the rest of it. So I threw myself into sorting out his probate, which I did within 6 months, quite happily, got all the legal stuff all done and everything. And then in the summer of 2017, I actually went away on a massive road trip with the kids.
Wow.
And my thought process through it was just hysterical, because I initially started off going, totally don't want to be a lawyer, don't want to go back, to being like, maybe I'd just get a job in Gap or something like that. That's never going to entertain me, and actually the hours might not suit childcare. And then coming full circle, well, I'll just go back to work. And so then I found I went back to work, but my heart was never in it in quite the same way. And I got as high as I could be without being a partner, and I didn't want to be a partner for a number of reasons. I moved to be closer to the kids and closer to home, but then that wasn't quite what I anticipated it would be either. And I felt that I was doing two jobs badly. The kids only had me at home, and so I didn't feel like I was doing that right. And then work, most of my colleagues were full-time. There was a handful that were part-time, and those that were part-time worked more hours than I did. So I really struggled with the balance of that. And I loved my clients, so I probably put far too much effort into the clients and not enough into the legal work. Yeah, so in, oh gosh, my brain's not gonna be able to work it out, but the autumn before lockdown, I handed in my notice and they didn't want me to go. And so I said, well, I'm happy to go on sabbatical because that suits me, because it gives me the option. I've got a job to come back to if I decide that's what I want to do. Hugely grateful. Thank you very much. But if I decide I don't want to come back, I don't want to have to work a notice period. So we agreed I'd work my contracted notice period so I could properly hand over all my files and go on sabbatical. So if I never came back, it wouldn't matter. And then literally 2 weeks after I stopped work, we went into lockdown. And, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I told work I wanted to sort out my house because I'd moved house on my own with 2 kids. So I was in slight chaos at home and spend more time with the children. And I was like, oh, I'm caged with the kids now. This isn't quite what I was anticipating. And then that started a bit of a mini existential crisis in lockdown, because I wasn't a solicitor, wasn't a wife anymore. I hadn't got my head around being a widow. I didn't like that label at all. And I didn't really know. And I'd forgotten, because I think so often we roller coaster in life, and we're so busy on the roller coaster, we don't step off and look at it and see what happened at the ups and what happened at the downs and how we reacted. And I think I'd gone through that roller coaster so much, and I'd ended up in a very, very, very busy place. Being a military spouse isn't easy at the best of times. Having a job that was quite stressful was quite a big deal on top. Our kids are quite dyslexic, so they need a lot of help and support. And it was just quite hard work. And I look back on it and I just think, God blimey, that was just really, really, really hard work. And I'd been so busy, I'd forgotten about how to have fun. And I know that sounds really bizarre, but in lockdown, someone said, well, you've got to do what makes you happy. And I was like, don't know what to do.
Yes. Yeah.
What do I do for Emma? Like, not as a mum, not as a carer, not as a widow, not as a spouse, not as a solicitor. What do I do for me that actually has fun? I was like, I don't actually know. I've totally forgotten how to have fun.
Yeah. So how did you go about exploring that?
One of my children went through a bit of a dip, a little bit like you not enjoying it because the grief came up. One of my kids, a lot of grief came up for her. So there was quite a lot of hand holding and TLC I was having and the homeschooling that I, like you, wasn't a natural at. That's for me anyway. And certainly didn't get the authority and respect from my kids that they potentially give to their
likewise.
But yeah, so I went back to coaching and counselling and just started to explore, and actually what really helped me was to trying to look back at what did the child love. Because how often when we're an adult do we forget what we really loved doing when we were a kid?
Yeah, definitely. You leave all that behind, don't you? Yeah, I know. It's really interesting, isn't it? And I think there is in these huge losses that we experience in life, you know, especially the loss of a spouse, a life partner, it does leave us with a lot of unanswered questions. We don't know how to be or where we fit in anymore. But that almost kind of creates an opportunity for us to invest in ourselves, doesn't it? And do the counselling, do the coaching, join the clubs, you know, just figure out who you are a little bit and invest in you. Because when do we ever do that? You know, like you say, we're kind of just on the roller coaster of life, aren't we? And we just keep going without ever really sort of stepping off and thinking, is, you know, is this working? Is this what I want? And, you know, for me in my story, it's kind of been life-changing, being able to, you know, take the opportunity, invest in me, discover who I am and what I want. It sounds like you've done something very similar. And creating someone within yourself and something, your life, that feels meaningful and fulfilling, you know, and really thinking about what you want that to look like. And of course, when you start out and you ask the questions, you've no idea, do you? You're like, I don't know, I have no clue. But you know, by sort of taking that step and just starting to think about it, you find them, don't you? The answers come to you eventually. It's not immediate, and I think it takes a long time, but it does come. So where do you find your fun and your joy now then?
Well, I love traveling,
Yeah.
which is really hard at the moment. So it's more a matter of little mini adventures. I used to love horse riding, and my kids are massively into horses. And that was part of our forever home dream. And I did get really upset that I couldn't do it for them, but actually I can do it, but in a different way.
Yeah.
And I love art, and I really enjoy writing. So yeah, and I love outside, running, dog walking, being outdoors.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's something very restorative and nurturing, isn't there, about being in nature. It's certainly helped me through my grief hugely. And now is my first port of call. You know, if I'm ever having a day, a moment, it's like, right, I just need to get out in nature. As long as it's not pouring with rain. I'm not so good with it. It's too wet. Fair weather nature person. So you kind of talked about the military and how they supported you after Simon died. I mean, how has that support kind of helped you through? Do you still get it? How is your relationship? Because obviously, being a military wife, it must be, you know, it's a large part of your life, I'm assuming. How have you sort of navigated the changes there, and how do you, I mean, are you still in touch with the military and how they work? How do you sort of figure that out?
Yeah, it's a really hard one. And actually, I think it was one of the biggest things that hit me in lockdown, because when I met my husband, I was actually in the TA myself. So military was, and I think that's what often people forget when they see a spouse, is actually whether the spouse actually had any links to that herself before she met whoever she's ended up with, or he. And for me, that biggest secondary loss was the military. Like, I sat in lockdown just thinking, you know, like, the one thing I want the kids to do is to remember who their daddy was. And the one thing he was, as well as fun and devoted and inspirational and all the rest of it, and at times very annoying because we can't just put them on a pedestal. But he was a Royal Marine, and he was very proud of being a Royal Marine, and he loved being a Royal Marine. And I've got the most amazing group of what I call my bootneck misses. So bootneck's Royal Marine, Mrs. other half. But actually, funnily enough, a lot of them, their spouses have left the forces now. So although it is a kind of link, it's kind of not a link as well. And the help that I'd had immediately afterwards had petered out because I hadn't needed it so much. I get Simon's pension, but anyone who pays into a pension or has life policies would get that regardless of what job they have. But I started to make some connections back into the military. I linked back into the RMA. I also joined something called Milspo, which is military spouses and other halves who are in business. I'm kind of their token widow.
Okay.
But they've taken me on as an ambassador now. But the whole idea of that is keeping your own business running alongside your military spouse's other half. And that has been a lovely connection for me for the military. And then within the organisation of Way, they've got loads of subgroups. And I joined Way soon after Simon died. And then I let it wane because I just didn't feel like I belonged in that big peer-to-peer group. And then I suddenly realized they had loads of subgroups. It wasn't one for the military. So I set one up, and I really like it. Like, around remembrance, we had a few people saying, oh gosh, which side do I wear the medals? And you know, they're kind of questions that are so important to some people, but you don't want to ask the wrong person and get the wrong advice. And the answer actually is whatever suits you is the right way to do it. It's really the answer. But just to know how other people do it is really amazing. So I set that up. And then the other thing was the children. And I was chatting to some Milspo ladies and saying how the kids were struggling. And they said, well, have you heard of Scotties? And I was like, I've heard of Scotties. And I'm like, oh, we'll put you in contact with another widow. So I chatted to this other widow and I said, how are you coping in lockdown? She went, well, for the kids, Scotties have been amazing. I said, but your husband died of cancer. And she said, yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, I thought it was and this is totally me, because when I then went into the cupboard to try and find his military number and the stuff I needed to fill in the forms, in there sat 2 Scotties forms. So someone on day one had obviously said, this is a fabulous charity, it's for the kids, but something in my head wasn't quite right. And I felt so guilty because they'd missed out on a good number of years of support from Scotties that have now, and it's just captured their imagination. You know, it's all about, you were saying about groups, and I think it's just about finding the group that you, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, finding the group that you feel like you fit.
Yes. Yeah.
Because people can offer you groups, but if you don't fit, it actually might make you worse rather than better.
Yeah.
And the kids, I tried some local charities for bereaved kids and stuff like that, and the kids just couldn't, it wasn't palatable. They just didn't get it. They didn't fit. And then Scotties, and they're just there. They love it. You just need to mention Scotties and they love it. And Scotties remember remembrance. They remember Simon's birthday. They remember Christmas, and they've got a Christmas party. We're going to go to our first face-to-face Christmas party, which is really exciting. So
that is, it is, and that's Scotty's Little Soldiers, isn't it?
Scotty's Little Soldiers.
And is that, are they, I mean, is that something the military have kind of created?
The story is absolutely inspirational, and I think you'll love it. It comes from a widow who has created something that has just been a lifeline for other people. And I think it really shows that in our grief, some amazing things can happen. So her husband was Corporal Scott, and I think this is the reason I had this image in my mind, but he did die out in Afghanistan. I think it's Afghanistan. When she was grieving, she was really worried about the kids. Like, she could find support for her, but she was really struggling to find support specifically for bereaved military kids. And then someone took them away on holiday. And when they were away on holiday, she saw her kids smiling happily for the first time ever. So initially, the charity was set up to provide holidays for bereaved forces kids, because she wanted to provide those smiles. It makes me feel quite emotional just talking about it. I think she's so inspirational. But find those smiles that she'd seen on her kids' faces. And that's how it was started. She went to her family and said, I think I want to set up a charity. And I think they probably all went,
oh, wow, that's amazing. What a wonderful thing to do. And what a great way to honour your person as well, you know, to set something up like that and to give back, you know, that is truly kind of finding meaning, isn't it, in your loss and giving back and helping others. I love these stories, and you're right, it really does highlight, doesn't it, that when your partner dies or you have a significant loss in life, it feels like the end of your life, doesn't it? You cannot imagine ever feeling happiness, peace, contentment, joy, anything again, because the pain, the physical, the emotional, mental pain that we experience, it's just so consuming, isn't it, that you just cannot see any sort of glimmer of hope or light. And even sometimes when you meet others that have kind of walked your path a little, that kind of are saying, you know, it's going to be all right, that you're like, I can't see it. I don't know how you can say that or feel that, because it's really hard, isn't it? But you know, as we sort of go through our grieving process and navigate our way forwards, I suppose, there are things, aren't there, that we discover, you know, and there's parts of us that I think we discover as well that we never knew existed. You know, it does shape us. It doesn't have to define us, but it definitely shapes who we become and the choices that we make. And some truly wonderful things have happened for people, haven't they, as a result, really, of losing their life partner. And that's not to say you're glad that that's happened, but you can appreciate the good that has come out of it, because good can come from bad. And I think sometimes acknowledging that and seeing that in others, it's just so inspirational, isn't it? It really is inspirational. So how are your girls doing now?
My elder daughter, is really, the psychology of it is absolutely fascinating. My elder daughter is slightly taken on a co-parenting role. So I'm just desperate for her to be a 13-year-old and to let me do the parenting.
Yeah.
And my younger daughter was phenomenally close, but also very little. She was 3 when he was diagnosed and 6 when he died. And she's the one who found lockdown really hard. And then, as bad luck would have it, she's now transitioned from primary to senior school. And that change has been really hard for her. And I do think that one of the things that we have to be aware of when we have got a huge loss is that change can trigger stuff. And she has found that change has got so mixed up with her grief and the realization that there's not a lot she can remember about daddy anymore. And that's quite heartbreaking, really.
It is. It's sad, isn't it? Because they are trying to process so much, and sometimes it's hard for us to articulate what it is we're feeling or thinking or needing in any given moment. And for our children, you know, it's almost just an impossibility, isn't it? And we're kind of looking to them sometimes for answers, and they don't have them. They don't know, and they're trying to find their way through it in the best way that they can. And there is a lot of support out there, but you know, like we were saying before, weren't we? It's the constant reminders of the loss for your children, isn't it, that just continue to show up in everyday life. And you know that's something that is going to be there as well for the rest of their lives. And that's hard, isn't it? That's hard, kind of looking at your children, feeling that pain. And, you know, as a mum, you want to take it away, don't you? You want to make everything better, but you know, you can't. And it's just so heartbreaking, isn't it? So heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It is. It's hard. But, you know, there are some wonderful charities out there that help, and it sounds like the day that you're going to at the beginning of December will be lovely, because you know they're around other children that have lost a parent too, and that can help normalize it for them, which I think is important, you know.
Hugely. Yeah,
it is. It's hugely important.
So
just, you know, I think it's important as well to talk about the caregiving side. You know, my husband died suddenly, but through my sort of nursing career, I've nursed people through illnesses and, you know, been with people and tried to keep them comfortable, and, you know, the things you do when somebody's dying. But it's one of the biggest things, I think, when you lose someone you love, that caregiving trauma, that side of it, you know. And as much as when we get married and you sort of stay in sickness and in health and all, you don't envisage that actually one day you will be a full-time carer for your spouse. And even in that, even if you were to think about it, you've no real idea what that consists of, and what it entails, you know, and the change in your relationship and just the heaviness of the caregiving side. So for you, how did you deal with that side of things in Simon's illness?
I had to be a bit manipulative, if I'm honest.
Okay.
Because as a Royal Marine, he was quite macho and I can cope and I can do this. So there was a lot of behind the scenes prep that I had to do. He wanted me to the very end to be his wife. He never wanted me to be his nurse and his carer. And that was blatantly obvious from day one, the whole way through. So there was a lot of running around in the background and trying to preempt what was going to happen and work out how it was going to be. So if we were going places, I would have to check what the food was going to be like and whether it was going to be okay, so that he would have an option that he might be able to eat. I had to be really aware of when he was really tired, so that he didn't have to say in front of everyone else, I'm really tired. Instead, it just so happened that things brought to an end and all the rest of it. I mean, the prime example was in the hospice at the end, is that he'd lost a phenomenal amount of weight. He was skeletal at the end. which was a huge shock for some of his, like, I mean, he was 6 foot and you know, like there was quite a lot of him when he was fit and healthy. So people who hadn't seen him for a few years, it was really quite a big shock. And one of his friends came over and was desperate to talk about him, and the kids were around, and I was like, I'll talk in the car, like, babysitter's coming over, when we get in the car and it's just you and me, I'll talk then. Got in the car, I was still reversing out the drive, and I found recent picture of Simon, and I handed it over and I went, just look at that. I want you to appreciate that that is what he looks like, because I knew that it would be a massive shock. And afterwards he said to me, I'm so pleased you did that, because it meant that when I saw him, I still saw the sparkle in his eyes, I still saw the smile, I still saw the bloke he really was, and how thin he wasn't such a shock. I would often be at the hospice when people arrived to kind of break the ice and crack a few jokes so that they got used to the fact that he was very thin and very tired. And then I would magically disappear because the van needed it was a car then, but the car needed some fuel, or I needed to get something from the kids for the shops or something. And I knew that he had about a 20-minute attention span before he started to fall asleep again. So I had a colouring book, but it was of places around the world, with the idea, because he had lots of friends all around the place and who travelled with him places. And so when I broke the ice, I would say, oh, you know, if he falls asleep, pick one of those, colour it in for the kids, write a note about why you've picked that page, and then he'll wake up and you can have a bit more of a conversation. I've still got that colouring book, and half of them are like only a tiny fractions coloured in, but that's almost sweeter. It's really lovely. But then I would magically reappear when I knew that he'd probably had enough, and break the ice again so that the goodbye would be okay, because for some people it would potentially be the last time they'd see him. So there was a lot of background, and I get quite upset when people say, oh, well, he didn't throw up very much. Well, no, he didn't throw up in front of you very much, but at home he threw up a lot, because he really struggled to eat, and at home he would challenge himself with the food that he was eating, but he was such a proud bloke, he didn't want to throw up in front of people, so he would always pick food that he knew would be less of a struggle when he was out and about with other people. So yeah, and also I was sly with the food, because obviously he was losing weight, so cream went into everything, and those Complan supplements went into everything, and I had to slightly make sure that me and the kids didn't end up the size of a house, because like everything had to have extra in it so that I could keep some weight on him.
Oh, it's like you say, there's so much to think about, isn't there? So much to think about. And even with people wanting to come and see him, there's probably that nervousness from them as well, like, what do I do? What do I say? Should I talk about this? Do I talk about that? And you're probably sort of managing that side of things as well, sort of helping people with the conversations.
It was amazing. I felt I did a lot of counselling, and it made me realise where my strengths lie. But, you know, I had some people who are phenomenal in their professional lives. Like Simon was quite high up as an officer, so some of the people visiting him were fairly impressive people who, on a sober work day, I'd probably be quite scared of, but I was the expert on Simon. And I'll never forget one of them coming to see him literally about 24, 36 hours before he died, and we went out to the garden, and he gave me a huge hug, and he looked down at me and he went, he's going to die. And I just had to say, he's a very sick man, he's not going to live for very much longer. And look after other people's emotions as much. But it kind of helped me, because I don't like feeling like a victim all the time and having the TLC. So, you know, like when I went to counselling, I could be the collapsed person and fall to pieces, but actually with everyone else, it helped me to help them, and it helped me to be a bit stronger.
And who did you lean on in those times? Who was, you obviously went to the counsellor, but did you have someone holding you up?
My parents have always been pretty, my sister have always been pretty amazing. We're a very close family, and there's certainly no lack of love amongst us all. I feel very lucky to have parents who are still happily married together in their mid-80s, and a sister all of whom we all live within about a 2-hour radius. So they're amazing. And I have to say, being part of the military, you are part of a family, and the community. And then the other community that I was part of is my local town. And the mums who were like school friend mums started a babysitting circle, so that when Si was in the hospice, I could go and see him in the evenings. And they had a WhatsApp group that I wasn't party to, and they would rolling work out who was coming to babysit in the evening, so that I could feed the kids, be with them, and then when it was time for bedtime, someone would turn up, read them a story, and I could disappear off to the hospice to be with Simon.
Oh, that's so lovely. What a lovely thing to do.
I think sometimes when really bad things happen, it does give you a bit more faith in human nature, because and it's sometimes the most surprising people who are the most helpful, and yet some people who you think would love you and care for you send you a text message saying, what do the kids want for Christmas? And you just think
definitely, like, really. It's very surprising, isn't it? Very surprising. So obviously with what you've been through with losing Simon, and your previous career as an end-of-life solicitor, how do you kind of now advise people on end of life? What do you say are, because I don't believe we have these conversations enough. We don't talk about death. We don't talk about our wishes. The amount of people, I always do like a fears session in my groups. And so many people say, I'm scared of dying because, I don't know what my kids and I'm like, well, have you got things in place? And they're like, no. And I get it, because it's scary. We don't want to have to sit with these things. And I remember sitting down with Simon with a financial advisor, a solicitor, and doing our wills and finances. And I was deeply uncomfortable having the conversation that we had. I was like, really, do we need to do this? My God, am I glad we did, because I can't even begin to imagine if we hadn't and things weren't in place for if the worst happened. But it's hard, isn't it? It's really hard. So, taking all that into consideration, what do you now kind of advise people or invite people to start thinking about, really, when it comes to either their own death, or if you are in a relationship with someone, how do you manage that side of things if the worst were to happen?
It's something that I feel really passionate about, and I've slightly lost the thread a little bit, if I'm honest, because when I stopped being a lawyer and started to train as a counsellor, I was passionate that I wanted to try and mix the counselling and getting people to talk about the end of life paperwork. But you're right, the problem is I keep getting disillusioned. I've done a few talks on end of life from my perspective as a widow, so not just the legal paperwork, what it's really like, and the take up is so poor because people just don't want to do it, which is really heartbreaking, because I know what happens when you don't do it, which makes me really, really upset. But I as a lawyer, I used to always say that those legal documents that you put in place, so the wills, the powers of attorney, the life policies, the critical illness, they're actually, you think you're done, you think you've put a big tick in a box and you're done, but they're actually the backbone. You need the meat on the bones. You need all the extra that goes around it, because does anyone know whether you want to die at home or in a hospice? Do you have some music you want played? Do you actually want no music? Have you got people you want to be with you? Have you got people that actually will piss the hell out of you and you don't want them anywhere near you? We plan for our births. We do these amazing plans for our births, and I don't think any of them actually happen. But what they do is they give options to people, and they give a bit of security to people, and they give a fallback and a plan B to people on what you really would like to happen. And I think it's twofold, really. So it's thinking about that end of life, like if I were suddenly in a really nasty car accident and I'm in hospital and I'm suddenly really poorly, what do I want people to do to make me more comfortable so that I have the best death possible? And I believe in the best death possible. I've watched a not very nice death of a 24-year-old who slipped into a coma and then subsequently died in hospital, and that was horrendous, and that was one of my biggest fears, because that was the only death I'd witnessed, and I was really worried that would be what happened to my husband. My husband's death was still a huge trauma, because I think death always will be a trauma, because if you love someone, watching them die is horrendous. But he died with a smile on his face, surrounded by people who loved him. And we could potentially have done more, but with the knowledge we had at the time, there is nothing more we could have done. And that's where I think you've got to find your peace on that. And then you need to park the death bit and think about, right, well, when I'm not here, yes, I've done my will, but actually, God, I just don't even know where to start. But, what age do I want the kids to learn to drive? Do I want them to have a contribution to buying a car? Will I pay the insurance, but they have to pay for the car? Do I want them to go to university? Do I actually not give a toss if they go to university? Do I want them to have all the money straight away, or do I want them to wait? Or am I happy for it to be advanced for certain things, like a deposit on a house or a this or a that? What are my ethos? What makes me tick? What do I really want the kids to have as a motto, as a thing that comes from me that they can live by? All of that is the meat that goes on the bones. And I believe really passionately in that. But I find that it's only people who have had a horrible experience and have been left not knowing and been left with huge question marks. Like, I am going to be really specific about music and readings at my funeral, because my husband gave me so many instructions, but not one piece of music and not one reading.
Wow.
But you learn from your mistakes. And I'm hoping that someday, when I have a bit more time, I can share a bit more of our mistakes and what I've witnessed, and using my legal knowledge and my counselling and my fascination with mental health and the fact that I've lived with it, and help people really work out how to do it better than I did it.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, but I've recently done David Kessler's Grief Educators program, which was just brilliant. And he talks about, the more meaningful the death, the more meaningful the grief. And it helps us in our grieving process, and like you say, all death is traumatic, but the less traumatic we can make it by talking about these things, understanding things, knowing that we're giving our person what they want, we're making sure their wishes are carried out, we're playing the music, we're reading the readings, we are carrying on their values, their beliefs, all of that kind of stuff. It helps us in our grieving process to feel like we're able to honor them in the best way that we can. When we haven't got that information, that's really hard, isn't it? Because you're guessing, and you're always questioning yourself, and then you're feeling guilty because you didn't do this and you didn't do that. And it's kind of it's layering your grief with more discomfort and
I
pain.
can understand why families shatter at that point, because you've then got a point where you've got people who can remember the 12-year-old because they knew them so well until the point where they went to school, so they feel like they know them really, really, really well. You've got the person who's the spouse or the partner, and they feel like they know them really well, and you've got no instructions. And I can totally understand why, because everyone wants what's best, and they've only got their own experience to speak from. And
it's
I think
hard.
that's really hard.
Yeah, it is, because my husband Simon, his dad had died 8 years maybe before he'd died, maybe 10. And his dad's ashes were scattered somewhere where they used to live, and Simon had always said to his mum, I want my ashes scattered there as well when I go, and that kind of was said. But of course then Simon and I had kids, and then we did actually talk quite openly, weirdly, about, we had all these discussions. I guess maybe because of me being a nurse and a midwife, it just prompts these kind of chats, and I'm just fascinated by them anyway. But and in that he would say, I don't want my ashes there anymore. I kind of want them to go somewhere that would be better for the girls, because that place would mean nothing to the girls. But he hadn't had that discussion with his mum, of course, and then he died, and then his mum's clinging on to the fact that his ashes are going to where his dad is, and I'm going, it's not actually what he wanted, but she's got nothing to go on apart from me saying it, and I could have been lying, and it did cause friction. Very luckily, we were okay. We figured it out. But there are moments in time, along with many other things, that cause this kind of disconnect, because people are clinging on to the one thing that they think they know about that person, and they think that they know best about that person, and that there is, you know, you loggerheads with people, don't you? And a lot of the time this is where you know, relationships do break down. And I think if we can have these conversations, or people can leave behind instructions, wishes, guidelines, it just helps those that I think are left behind navigate it really in a way that feels better to them. But it's not easy. It's not easy having those conversations.
And I have to say as well is that, like, I literally, I mention the word in-law to other people, and they've already got their own issues about in-law. I'm very lucky. My in-laws are really good people.
Yeah.
And I also believe so passionately that they are the only people that can help me tell the children what their daddy did when he was little.
Yes.
And to me that is priceless.
Yeah.
And to me, I'll move mountains in order to make sure that can still happen.
Yeah.
But it is so difficult to navigate relationships that were not necessarily your relationships, you know, like Simon was always the one who used to arrange us going up to see his family and all the rest of it. And suddenly it's my job to arrange it, and different families have different ways of communicating, and then you can start to overthink it, like, oh my gosh, do I bombard them too much, or oh my gosh, if I don't communicate with them, do they think I'm not interested anymore, and all of the rest of it, whereas actually they're probably just really grateful to see their grandkids.
Yeah, definitely. I know, but we overthink it all, don't we, and start second guessing everything because it is so complicated sometimes. So obviously, you know, we started off, we've talked about you being a end of life solicitor, what that's brought to you, your widow, you kind of touched on your trainee counselling. But you've also got your rainbow hunting and your wannabe author. I know you're sort of busy sort of creating something amazing for people to read in the future, and it will be amazing, of course it will. So, you know, I really like to talk about the good that comes out of the bad. You know, I like to give people a bit of hope and positivity, because it does feel like it's the end, doesn't it? You know, when these things happen to us, you just cannot see past it. You think that your best days are behind you, nothing's ever going to be good again, and you're never going to find any peace, contentment, joy, love in your life. Understandably, we've all been there, but you know, as time moves on and we do the work, I'm a huge believer, and we have to kind of do the work. I don't think time alone is enough for us, and we have to make those choices and take those steps, but good things can come. So for you, what good things have come out of your loss? What have you learned? What has it taught you, and what has it given to you?
There's quite a lot, actually. I wonder if I'll be able to cover it all. I think the most important thing is that I would do anything to have my kids' dad back, and that goes without saying. However, you were saying about all the work we do, and actually one of the things that's come out of all the work for me is I think I've reconnected with a part of me that's been missing since I was probably about 11 years old. And the really authentic me, the true me. And I'm not frightened anymore of saying, actually, that doesn't suit me and the kids. I'm really sorry we can't make it, rather than trying to move mountains for other people. And so rediscovering me, which started in lockdown, and I think will always be a lifelong lesson, because I think we change, and I think over time things change. That's been a definite positive. I think the other thing is learning that my keep busy coping strategy is entirely faulty.
I love it.
Like it served its purpose, and I'm sure if I have any more trauma in my life, it will come straight back in and it will serve a purpose again. But actually we need to take our foot off the gas, and we need to pause, because actually we can't change yesterday. Yesterday's happened. We have no influence on tomorrow. Whatever happens tomorrow happens. But right now we can enjoy, and right now we can be happy. And one of the things that I've realized really strongly, that thing you were saying about heartbreak, oh my gosh, I had totally not anticipated. I knew that he was going to die. So there was no surprise in it at all. I'd known it for 2.5 years. It had been worrying me for 2.5 years. But I was so shocked when he died. And that shock was not just about the emotions, but I physically felt heartbroken. And I don't think I can put into words how or why, but you carry a little part of that grief with you all the time. So you suddenly go somewhere and you do something, you think, God, Simon would love this. He'd be so proud of this. And in that moment, your heart is breaking, and yet you're loving it. And I hadn't realized that pain and joy can totally and utterly coexist. And actually, I think we mentioned earlier, like how often are we cold, wet and miserable and someone gives us a cup of tea, and that tea is so sweet and so lovely and so amazing. Life's not perfect, and it's enjoying it for what it is, and enjoying all the wrinkles and all the bits. When I did a eulogy for Simon, I specifically mentioned some of the stuff that really irritated me about him. Yes. Because I think life's just not perfect.
No.
And I think the other thing is changing career as well. I still don't know quite where I'm going. I'm on a path, but I enjoy the path.
Yeah.
The destination will work itself out, and hopefully it'll become clear in time, but I'm enjoying the journey. I'm training as a counsellor. I've still got a little bit to do with law because I'm on the national board at Solicitors for the Elderly. And I'm having great fun helping them out, doing some new ideas. And then I'm writing my book, which I hope will help other people. But that's been a life lesson in itself, the whole writing experience. So
yeah. Huge. Absolutely huge. But I love everything you've just touched on there, and I was talking to a client earlier about it, that we can get quite fixated on the destination, can't we, where we're heading, and I'll be happy when I get here, and I'll feel happier when that's happened, or when I've sorted this out, and that's really, it's relatable. I get it. That was me. But we have to find ways of enjoying the process, of enjoying the now, and allowing that to take us to where we're meant to be, to where we're going to be going. Because if we can find the joy in the now, if we can make the right decisions for us today, that does lead us down the right path, doesn't it? It affects everything moving forwards, and it's believing in that. So rainbow hunting, obviously you've got the website, haven't you? Which is that rainbow hunting?
It's literally rainbowhunting.co.uk.
So, I'll put all your details in the show notes so people can find you. And there's a lot of information on there, isn't there? There's obviously some blogs as well. And are you hoping that will become more in time? Is that something that you want to grow?
Yeah, so initially I started it because I suddenly realized if I want to do a book, I need people who quite like the idea and who trust me enough to part with a bit of money to purchase a book. So it's about building my newsletter. I do a monthly, and I only do a monthly newsletter because I cannot stand being spammed every week by people. So it really is only once a month. And it's got all the links to the most recent articles I've uploaded to the website in it. And like for National Grief Awareness Week, I've done a few downloads for that. So at the moment, my website is really just providing people with a little bit of information that I think might help them. So some of it's legal, some of it's emotional, some of it's some of the mental health stuff. I've got a big resources section, which I'm constantly adding to, of places that people can go for help, and some of the stuff that I get involved in. And then I'd still love to do a challenge someday where I try to encourage people to sort their paperwork out. I was going to do one in the autumn, but because my daughter was struggling with the change up to senior school, I've postponed it. But the primary focus at the moment is the book, but I think that the website will probably become the counselling, life coaching, and I'm very happy to speak to people on a life coaching perspective straight away, and mainly just signpost and listen. Prime example, maybe they're a widow and they could do with one of your group courses or something, but I think sometimes we click into people and it's personality driven and we like someone, and then if they recommend somewhere, we know where we might be able to go to get a bit more help.
Yeah, Yeah, you're right. And I think, touching on what you said there, it's about connections, isn't it? And it's about stories that resonate. And I think, with your military connection, there's obviously a lot out there. And what I love, I think, is that you couldn't necessarily find what you wanted, especially within Way. So you created it, and I think that's just, I love that, because it's, if you can't find what it is you're looking for, it's not there, create it, which is essentially what I've done. I wanted me in my journey, and it wasn't there. So I kind of thought, okay, well, let's figure this out. Let's find a way of doing that. And
I think that's
it.
what I've done with rainbow hunting as well, is that I wanted what rainbow hunting gives,
yes.
A bit of information on the legal and the practical stuff. And for example, if people wanted to do a will, but there was a part of doing the will that they were really stuck with, I'd be happy to talk it through with them, so that by the time they go to a solicitor, they know what they're asking the solicitor to do.
Yes.
And I've had that so often, like maybe they can't decide who the guardian is, or who to make the executor, or actually, what does that mean? And I can't give legal advice because I'm not practicing as a solicitor, but I can help on a practical basis.
And that is huge, because I remember after Simon died having to do all of these things, and just I didn't understand it. I'd done it with Simon, but he'd kind of guided the process. I just kind of turned up, and when it's down to you and all those decisions, and I didn't understand a lot of the terminology. They speak in another language. They write in a. I'm like, can you not write this in just normal plain English? Because even when I said to the solicitor what I wanted, and then what I got back in my will, I was like, does this say what I wanted though? Because I can't fathom what you've actually written here, because it's just weird. And it's that side of it, isn't it? And then you're intimidated because you don't want to look stupid and kind of go, oh, what? So having that there, I think, again, is just such valuable support.
And the signposting as well. I believe really strongly that if you're going to get a will, you need to go to someone who's regulated. Because, and it's not necessarily because people who are unregulated are no good. I'm sure you get some very high quality unregulated will writers, but the difference is that when people are regulated, they've got a huge liability insurance. So God forbid an accident or a mistake does happen, they're backed up by all the support of being properly insured and all the rest of it. And also purely by the fact that they're regulated, yes, they might not be firing on all steam and they might not be the best solicitor you've ever had, but they will have done the exams, they will have done the, the qualifications that get them to that point. And I'm watching fascinated the whole will writing thing, because your will is the only legal document that says when you die who's having your assets. And the whole concept that you can go to WH Smith for 15 quid and get a piece of paper and write it yourself. I mean, I wouldn't cut my hair myself, so why would I want to do that? You know what I mean?
That's so true, isn't it? And it's information like that, that I don't know. I didn't know that about solicitors being regulated. People might say make sure they're regulated, but I don't know why I'm making sure they're regulated. It's being informed, isn't it? And we're not. And sometimes we don't even need to know what we need to be informed about, because we know so little about
and the other thing
area.
I find absolutely fascinating, just very boringly from a legal perspective, but also introducing the mental health, is when you are grieving a loss, you are actually vulnerable. Your thoughts are vulnerable, your emotions are vulnerable, you could potentially be easily persuaded. So actually you need a solicitor who works with vulnerable people. And I know that a lot of widows want to, I certainly thought that I was like a knight in shining armor and there was nothing vulnerable about me at all, but I couldn't have been more wrong for me personally. But I think it's really, really, really important that people realise, like, for example, solicitors for the elderly isn't just for the elderly, they deal with vulnerable adults. So if you've got a child with a disability, you want to make sure that the person who writes your will understands all the complexities that come with benefits and disabilities and all the rest of it. And that might get totally missed otherwise.
God, see, interesting. Again, things you don't know and don't understand, because it's not that clear, is it? And there's so much to it. There's just so much information there, Emma. There really is. No, I love it. I think the more we can help people, the better, just understanding what is out there. But just Before we go, you know, if you could go back and sort of offer yourself one piece of advice to that new raw widow after Simon died, and kind of, you know, thinking about where you are now, what would you say to yourself?
That's easy. I would say ask for help.
Brilliant.
Because people actually want to help you, and in a really bizarre way, you are helping them by asking for help, because they want to help you, they just don't know how.
Yes.
And it doesn't even matter if you say, I need help, but I don't know what I need help with. That's the start. But just to acknowledge, you know, that Charlie Macklesley thing with the, what's the most courageous thing you've ever said, help. Like, I 100%, it is so difficult to show our vulnerability, and it is so difficult to ask for help. And I know that I needed help. You know, I was surviving on about 4 hours sleep a night initially after Simon died. I needed help just to make sure I didn't have an accident on the M5, you know. It's but you're so in it, you can't see it, but sometimes you do know there's a niggle, and you can feel that niggle, and it's listening, because sometimes your body knows, your body is trying to tell you that you need to ask someone for help, whether it's a GP, whether it's a friend, whether it's going to counselling, anybody. But people are generally, I fundamentally believe people are kind, and they want to help, and they would be so relieved to know that there was one small act of something, whether it's cleaning your gutters or
the practical
picking
things,
the kids up from school, walking the dog, but they want to help.
They do, and people feel helpless in it, don't they? And by guiding them, it helps everyone, you know. And it shows that self-kindness and that self-compassion. We don't have to do it all alone, and in fact we can't heal in isolation. We just can't, you know. We have to lean on others, and it's not permanent. You're not going to need all that help forever. You will find your feet again eventually, but like you say, take all the help you can get and reach out to whoever you need to reach out to. That's fantastic advice.
I think that's the other thing that I put hand in hand with that, though, is exactly what you just said, which I hadn't realised until I started to do some training with crews. But it is a fact, it's not you, it's a fact that grief does not heal in isolation. We don't heal in isolation. We are social beings, and we need others around us to help us to heal.
100%. Yeah, exactly. And I think we give ourselves a hard time for thinking that we can't do it on our own. You're not supposed to.
No.
that's not part of the plan. Surround yourself with anyone and everyone that wants to kind of help prop you up, because I literally was carried. People picked me up and they carried me for the first year, really. And I wouldn't be where I was now without that support. It's what we need, and it's how we get through. Absolutely, 100%. Emma, thank you so much. I'm so excited to see where this journey takes you. The book, your rainbow hunting, your counselling, and all the good that you are doing. Like I say, we'll put all your details on to the show notes so people can reach out and contact you if they want to, and ask you any questions. But it's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved hearing about your story and Simon's story, and yeah, I really look forward to see what's coming next.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Emma.